Have you ever heard the phrase, live like it is your last? Have you heard the phrase? I have never really liked that phrase. What does it mean, your last day? Is it meant to activate? Think about it, you have one day left to live. Would you actually be able to do something inspiring, something that will leave a mark or a proof you ever lived? One day, what would you do? I know what I'd do, and it looks a little bit like this. For me, these 6 words breathe desperation. They scream of finality, of an end so near that you feel with futility and hopelessness. Now, I like to say, live like it is your first. For on your first day, you're truly filled with opportunity. Anything is possible. You're at the beginning of your journey. You're truly filled with hope. I'm the proud member of an interesting generation. Some call us Generation Ys, other millennials, but no matter what you call us, we're the firm believers in the opportunities of tomorrow, in today being the first day of the rest of our lives. Anything is possible for us. I can achieve all my dreams. I can do anything, I can be anything, I can go where I can. This fundamental part of who we are today. I can, therefore I am. A fundamental basis of our modern existence. We are, however, also the first generation to suffer immensely from the unlimited opportunities, from the unlimited choices, and the unlimited can. Having been promised the world from birth, our reality is an endless stream of unmet expectations and disappointment when contrasted to what we expect from life. In fact, in 2013, the American Psychological Association named us millennials the most stressed out generation in recent history, reporting the highest levels of clinical anxiety, strain, and depression than any other generation at the same age. Us, the generation of unlimited opportunities. So how can that be? Could it be that our firm belief in the tomorrow is in fact our biggest weakness? The thing that gives us most opportunity, yet suffocates us with imminent fear of unmet expectations and disappointment. Have we forgotten to ask ourselves, what is the meaning of all of it? Perhaps we have. But what is the true importance of the tomorrow? I am myself an active and ambitious individual, and I have been like this. Ever since high school, my heart has always been filled with moments lost, of time wasted, not achieving my dreams, living like it is my last in constant race with time, under constant pressure and stress for achieving, for meeting expectations. So how could I learn to live like it is my first day again? It's a question I've been asking myself for quite some time now. And while I do not have a universal answer to this question, I'm here to tell you the story of how I found an answer for myself. And this discovery and change is in fact connected to one of my fondest memories as a child, the memory of my dad telling me bedtime stories before going to sleep. My dad didn't used to tell me fairy tales. He used to always talk about his family, about his youth, about my grandparents, about his grandparents. And I found all of these stories to be fun and interesting and entertaining, yet unfamiliar and distant. Because how could I, as a child, relate to the reality of his youth? No, for me, they were all stories of a past long gone, once upon a time, of a past not lived. I remember, for example, the story of my grandfather. Having lost his father at the age of 6, his mother sends him off to military academy, something very prestigious to do in 30s Royal Bulgaria, because she couldn't support him anymore. He studies there, he becomes a lieutenant and an Air Force pilot in World War II, and we fast forward a few years. The war is over, and Bulgaria is at the dawn of its communist rule. My grandfather has just returned from the battlefield and is now getting used to normal life back in the capital. He's just met my grandmother and is rekindling with old friends from the academy from before the war. And all of them, the young people that they are, start organizing social gatherings, parties, having fun, hanging out in my grandfather's apartment. But the reality of new communist Bulgaria that my grandfather returned to soon caught up with him. A neighbor, a downstairs neighbor in the same apartment building that he lived in, complained about the gathering of people, about the imperialist music being listened to, and about the Western propaganda being discussed. My grandfather, a very stubborn man, completely dismissed him, ignored him. He just continued doing his parties until one January evening when the doorbell rang and the militia arrived, taking my grandfather away. In just days, he's convicted of being a spy and an enemy of the communist state for his military background and education, for his acquaintances from before the war, and for his actions at those parties. And he's sent off to a concentration camp. Yes, it might come as a surprise, but in fact, Bulgaria, alongside other of its fellow Eastern European countries at the time, had over 100 forced labor camps in the period of 1944 and 1962. And my grandfather, alongside any free-thinking men or women, anybody that would bring a remnant of pre-communist Bulgaria or the West, would be sent there, fighting for their lives, often without so much even as a trial. And all of this because my grandfather threw a party. My father used to be very fond of my uncle. He used to tell me stories about him all the time. My uncle is a really fascinating man who in 1965 was the creative director and cinematographer in an anti-fascist movie. Anti-fascist struggles were in fact a very common topic in the communist narrative. So while filming this film, the crew behind the film, including my uncle, take the executive decision to change the last line of the film, the last line of the main character before being shot to death by a fascist squadron. They changed the line from something like, "Long live communism," to the main character asking for a glass of water. The movie is released, and the entire cultural society is in uproar. The crew is publicly shamed, and my uncle is removed from his job and home and is deported to another town, where he's forced to work and live from the attic of the local theater. Living and working from that one room with 3 infant sons and a young wife, using the theater makeup rooms as bathroom and kitchen facilities, he lives for almost 4 years. Yes, my uncle was one of the many artists, directors, poets, cultural leaders that underwent exile, imprisonment, or even death for daring to have a say. Because my uncle and his crew changed one line in a movie. But from all the stories that my dad used to tell me, my favorite were the stories about my dad himself. My dad is an artist, and in his pursuit of a fine arts education, he managed to escape Bulgaria and go as far west as Romania. Really exciting. But it was exciting for him because being in Romania actually helped him being exposed to a little bit more Western culture than he would have been back home. And so during one university vacation, he decided to go back home to visit his family. Having been inspired by his heroes at the time, he's wearing a long green coat, ankle-high boots, jeans tucked in the boots, long beard, long hair, total hippie. The moment he arrives in Sofia, Bulgaria and gets off the train, he's taken off to the militia office, where he's questioned and threatened that if he does not remove those clothes and shave that hair and beard immediately, he will be arrested. My dad is only 21 at the time. And he tells me that he ran home, scared, locked himself up, and refused to leave the house for the remainder of his vacation. He spent his vacation basically in the kitchen, listening to a small pocket radio to the BBC under a thick blanket, for fear that his neighbors will hear him listen to imperialist material, for fear of his father's and my grandfather's fate. Yes, the reality of my father's youth was that of no creative freedom or freedom of expression, not even in private. for you do not know who is listening even at home. These were only some of the stories that my dad used to tell me. But time passed, I grew up, and my dad stopped telling me bedtime stories. Until one afternoon. And I remember this like it was yesterday. I was just 17, and it was my last semester of high school, my last year of high school. And I was studying for a physics final. I really hated that class. It was a total nightmare. And I was procrastinating. I was sitting on top of the desk. I used to always do that, kind of climb on top and look through the window. And this is the window that I would look through. And I would look at the sky and I would just daydream. I would just imagine I would be somewhere else, anywhere else but there. And so my dad comes into the room and he sits next to me. There's a little couch, crosses his arms and legs, looks at me for a while, and talks. 17 years ago, I had to wake up at 4 in the morning to stand in line so that I could buy one bottle of milk so your mom could feed you. 17 years ago, I had to start working from your grandmother's spare bedroom because the government agency I worked for had been declared bankrupt. 17 years ago, your mom had to give up full-time employment so she could take care of you, so she could take you to English classes, math classes, physics classes, theater, sports, so you could get the education that you deserved. 17 years ago, no one knew what tomorrow would bring. In just 4 months, you will leave for the Netherlands to study in a language that you speak better than your mother tongue. To study law, to study art, to write, to dream, to travel, to discover who you were meant to become. Because you can. So how's that physics test coming along? Yeah. And I remember it like it was yesterday. I remember every word, and you know, that moment changed everything for me because it made me realize that I was lucky enough to be born only 1 year before the fall of the Berlin Wall. I was lucky enough to be blessed with parents who, despite their reality and their past, taught me to have the fundamental belief in the tomorrow as a part of who I am. My family will never forget what it means to be part of a predetermined system, what it feels like to have your creativity and identity equal a fear for your life. But you know what? Despite all of it, the stories of my family, in fact, did have a happy ending. My grandfather left the concentration camp. He studied again and became a chemical engineer. He raised my dad and my aunt, the amazing, stubborn man that he was, and could bake one hell of a cake when he wanted to. And my uncle never gave up with his creativity and imagination, endlessly giving him strength. Today, one of the most iconic artists and directors in Bulgarian cinema, he never stopped pushing the boundaries of Bulgarian culture until his very last breath 1 year ago. My dad never did shave that beard. And even though his journey might have taken him to unexpected turns and his struggles might not have ended today, still, he's endlessly driven by his motivation. The gratification of handing over his knowledge to the next generation, thus spending most of his time as a fine arts professor back home. Earlier today, I asked you, have we forgotten what the true importance of tomorrow is? We're stressed over money, we're stressed over careers, we're stressed over society expectations, we're stressed over our own expectations. We're stressed over stress. Among others, Time magazine calls us the me generation, identifying us as cool, opinionated, not all that passionate, and informed but inactive. So psychology today calls us the trophy generation, arguably the most reviled generation in recent history, identifying us as cool, whiny, narcissistic, self-entitled, opinionated, greedy, needy. But they know it, and we know it. There is so much more to our story. I've told you my story, And the story of my family is the reality of many people around the world still. Reality and story, which if understood, if embraced, helps us realize what the fundamental belief in the tomorrow makes us capable of. And most importantly, that this is already part of who we are if only we let it. I do not have an answer to the world's problems. Probably no one person has. But I can tell you one thing. You cannot wait for a system to allow you to say, I can. You have to be, despite the circumstances. For you are who you are, despite the obstacles. Do not wait for someone to tell you you can. Do not wait for me to tell you you can. Because it is then that you lose who you are and become a pawn in a predetermined system. Of any system. Of the system of my ancestors, of the system that defines us as millennials, of the system that you define yourself. Understand that the absolutes of our today are not absolute and can be so easily taken away. Transform this into your biggest strength, into your strongest motivation. Because if there is anything that the pain in the past teaches us, is that we are here today as a result of the hope that came alongside that pain. This is an inherent part of who I am, and I strongly believe that this is an inherent part of who you are too. Our journey towards hope is a gift of the generations before. We will not be ignorant to the pain that is next to us, because that pain is part of all of us. And this reminds us that today, we do not live like it is our last day, but live like it is the first day of a better future. Thank you.